Hello, I'm Andrew Susskind, and I'm a psychotherapist and author based in West Los Angeles since 1992, specializing in trauma and addictions. Welcome to our podcast, which I call It's Not About the Sex, also the title of my recent book. Here we focus on all topics related to compulsive sexual behavior, often referred to as sex addiction. In particular, we explore ways to build long-term, sustainable recovery while establishing more meaningful connection and greater intimacy. Our intention is to offer fresh viewpoints, brand new perspectives, and practical, user-friendly tools toward living a more deeply connected life. Let's get started.
Daisy Swan has been a career and executive coach for almost 30 years. Daisy has worked with thousands of clients working in every kind of function and of all ages. She works with clients in one-on-one coaching sessions, offering valuable ways to gain clarity to find new and fulfilling ways of living and working. Based in LA for decades and now in Santa Barbara, she works with clients via Zoom who are located all around the globe. Daisy, a meditator for roughly 40 years, is also a certified mindfulness instructor through UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center. She is also a somatic coach and helps clients connect with their body to access helpful information. And on a more personal note, I've known Daisy for many years, and Daisy is the most responsive, conscientious, and professional career coach I've ever known. And I've sent many, many clients to her without reservation. And I'm so pleased to have Daisy with us today.
Thank you, Andrew. That's really, really kind of you.
Oh, you're so welcome, Daisy. It's such a pleasure having you here. And it's such a joy to have a chance to be with such a trusted colleague to talk about such an important topic, which isn't always talked about in the vein of addiction recovery. So I'm just so glad we get to talk today together. And for our listeners who may not have a familiarity with career coaching, I'm wondering if you can share just a little bit about what exactly is career coaching or career strategy.
What I get, a lot of people now are trained as coaches, right? And so there are all these life coaches out there. And so I've kind of taken the life coaching methodology and which I'll say more about and put that as an overlay on career counseling. Coaching in general, right, is helping individuals or groups of people think about where they are now and where they want to be, and really think about how are we going to get there. So it's less of a therapeutic process, which you do a lot of. We're not going back to discover the why issues, why did this happen? But we will look at how did you get here and how do we want to move forward? So it is a very forward looking, and in many cases quite pragmatic, but I fold in a lot of various, I suppose you could say, modalities to think about where someone is, what their experience is, and what they want to change to be able to have a more authentic experience in their work. So we're really looking at what their experience is in work that is not working, that they want more of what could be working. And together we examine, who they are and what's really important to them, and put it all together and go forward.
I love what you said about what I would call the hybrid between life coaching and career coaching or career counseling. And when I've worked with a coach in the past, what was so important to me was to feel that somebody was in my corner and that I wasn't alone and that I really had somebody to partner with and to have a chance to look at the possibilities that I might consider. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how that works for you and your clients.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a client one time, she said, it's so great to work with you because I feel like I don't have to be worried about my career all by myself. like you're holding on to it. If I don't want to think about it, when we get back together, we'll work on it together, and I think that it's very much a relief for people when they know they have a professional third party person involved in, something that it seems like everybody should just know how to manage their career somehow. But, and so family members, they get involved, like, make suggestions, oh, you should do this or that. Your loved ones, your spouse or whoever might say, oh, why don't you do this? And it can all get so confusing. So, and work is very complex now, I mean, it didn't used to be this way, really, truly, before the 80s, I would say. People kind of went on a track and kind of did what they did. And, the 30-year career with one company kind of model was what people knew of as a career. And that's just not the way it is anymore. So I think it's, for so many people, it's really a very important, what I do, I think is very important for a lot of people to figure out how to move through all the complexities that they face.
Sure. And what I run into with many of my clients, and the reason I send them in your direction, is because they're just so immobilized with fear that it's such a lonely process and that it feels very ominous. And what I appreciate about what you bring to the work is that you have a lightness of being, and you have a way of really being there with your presence that makes a huge difference. It's not just about moving from point A to point B, which is important, but it's also really being there in a way that can help somebody believe in themselves, maybe more than they could by themselves. And, that has been a beauty, something that I just have been so impressed with through the years. And to go backwards for a moment, Daisy, I'm wondering what got you started in this kind of work. I mean, this is really, there's something about the heart space in this that you bring, and I'm wondering if you can share about that.
Yeah, as with all important work, right? There's a real connection there. I was a really lost 20-something. I was very much on my own to figure things out. My parents were pretty consumed with their own work, divorce and lives, and I was just pretty lost. And I hadn't finished my BA as I was supposed to because of all of the family stuff. And I always like to do more creative kinds of things. I worked for a magazine. I was a graphic designer. I worked in food. And finally, I met with a career counselor. And I was 28, and she helped me really do what I do now. She helped me look at what I've always wanted to do. And it just cleared the space for me in a non-judgmental place to really think about, who I was and what I really aspired to. And she helped me figure out how to go back to school. And, anyway, long story short, I ended up going to graduate school after I completed my BA. I was 30 and feeling way behind, everybody else. And can I tell you how many times people tell me they feel so behind? And my first job out of graduate school was the assistant director of the Career Center at University of Chicago, where I got my master's. And it was just a great fit. I didn't even know that was a real career path, nor did I really want a career. But I got to help people think about who they were and what they wanted to do with their lives. And I got to use all of my experience of being lost and all of these books I'd been reading because it was a passion. I was really, so a lot has happened. But I've been the director of the a couple of career centers, and associate director of career centers. And I went off on my own in 1999. I started on my own.
So your work is truly from a place of having been there,
Yeah.
which makes a huge difference. And I'm wondering, when it comes to the kind of clients you work with, I know you work with a wide variety, but if you can share a little bit about the type of clients that you enjoy working with the most.
Yeah. Well, I do have such a wide variety. I've kind of, as I'm sure you do, as I know you do, you fall in love with each of your clients. And all of my folks are curious. They've experienced something somewhere, so they know that where they are right now can't be the last stop. That something's not working. And I always tell people, when we enter change, right, something has gotten to a place where it's an ending. Something's not working anymore. So there's got to be a new start. And so, my clients, we really look at who they are, and therefore these are people who are willing to be open to themselves and with me, so that we can look under the hood for what's important, and then we start following the breadcrumbs. And it's pretty creative.
Of course. So the creativity, I imagine, is really based on the wisdom of working in this field for many years, but also collaboratively working with your clients and discovering what their true passions and priorities are, and leveraging their strengths in that way. Is that an accurate way of putting it?
Yeah, that was great. Well said. Yeah, for sure.
Well, along those lines, I that this podcast focuses on folks in recovery from sexual compulsivity, and not just folks who are newly sober per se, but sometimes people who listen to the podcast have been away from their addictive compulsive behaviors for months, if not years. But many times clients are still feeling stuck, right? They may be able to refrain from those old behaviors, but they haven't really been able to move forward or take a closer look at what was their heart's desire. What do they really, really want? And so I'm wondering, from your perspective, how is career coaching with clients in recovery from addictions any different than with other clients you work with?
Yeah, it's not really different. The situations that present themselves sometimes, people are blocked for very particular reasons because of some sort of, let's say, distracting behavior. And so, like, if I can, I'll give an example of working with somebody, and this is, very fictionalized. So I'm protecting this person I'm thinking of. But I did this earlier. Well, no, it was like at the beginning of in the fall. I was working with a client who, because of some behaviors that he really wished he hadn't engaged in, a very, very successful guy, found himself called to the carpet in his organization, and asked him to resign because of some behavior that was not appropriate. And it was devastating. I mean, he was devastated, and he also realized that this was probably coming for a long time. And he recognized it as probably coming for a long time because he was bored.
Right.
And that got him in trouble. And,
Yeah.
and he's, he had the wisdom to recognize, I mean, he was in a recovery program and he had the wisdom to recognize that this was probably such a blessing for him because now he could really look for what he wanted, genuinely what he wanted, because he had been in his career path for close to 25 years. And, I also, of course, have clients who don't have that scenario at all.
Sure.
But in this case, and I was so proud of him for the work he was doing to really look at his situation and get the support he needed. And at one point he, finally he had to overcome a lot of fears about how to talk about what had happened, how to share where he was. And with, honestly, he didn't need to. He didn't need to do a whole confessional to other people. But we worked on how he was going to interview, how he was going to talk with, his network about what he was looking for and what had happened. And, it was really beautiful. And also how he could communicate with his spouse about what he wanted, because she was really out of sorts with the whole thing. And so, we had a lot of conversations about the scenario, which was tricky, for in a professional setting to be able to come up with the communication strategies. And we did it really well. And he ended up landing in a position that was perfect. And and I have to tell you, as we all get tested, so to speak, by our surroundings, he was invited into a very similar job that would have had him back in that boring kind of work, but it would have given him a lot of the financial resources that he had been used to.
Right.
And, together, I mean, we talked through these things a lot, and he ended up making a choice to go in another direction. It felt a little riskier, but it was genuinely in the direction that he wanted. So that was a really beautiful thing to see. And so, yeah, it's very similar to the experience that other people who are not going through recovery would experience. But but the particular issues that we needed to work through were particular to a recovery issue.
Sure. And I also hear with that particular example that he was able to find something that was a better fit and more in alignment with what he really wanted and what mattered to him. And I imagine that in a way it was like you said, it became this crossroads for him where he had no choice but to kind of recreate himself. And by you walking that walk with him, it gave him more ability to really take a larger look at what really counted and what fit for his recovery as well, I assume.
Yeah, very much so. And, this is the place where, as you were saying, having somebody to walk with you or having that partner. And that's what I tell people is I really partner with them as they go through this process. In this case, his wife who loves him and supports him and all that, she had her own fears and she kind of wanted him to go back. She wanted everything to go back to the way it was.
Interesting.
And he knew that was not good for him. And I knew that wasn't good for him. And so I got to play the role for him of holding up the mirror of, who are you really now, knowing what you know. And that helped him to really help his wife hear who he was now. And so that's why I feel like we really did it together because he needed that reminder and that, that support to be able to be who he really wanted to be and help her to understand what that was about.
Yeah, no, I love that. So even though you're working one-on-one with this gentleman, it's also affecting the spouse.
Yeah.
And maybe the family beyond that, we don't know, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's a great illustration that even though you're just working one-on-one with somebody, it really affects everybody around them as well.
Yes, it's yeah, and whether you're a young person, I've worked with people who have been early in their career, mid-career, late career,
Uh-huh.
going through recovery issues. Yes, it's a bigger web, right, that we all exist in.
Yeah, it's really systemic,
Yes.
even if you're not with everybody in the same room. Yeah.
For sure. And the family members play, oftentimes unwittingly or, not meaning to, but they
Right.
do play a pretty big role
Yeah.
in the recovery process, right?
Sure. Sometimes being a wonderful support and sometimes getting in the way. So
Yeah.
how do you hopefully invite everybody into the process one way or the other?
Right.
I mean, one of the
and
things
still have boundaries though, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's a big part of it. And reestablishing those boundaries, because before recovery, it looked one way. And then after recovery, it looks a very different way.
Right.
But I also wanted to add that I think with folks, especially in earlier recovery, maybe in the first year or two, it really is a wonderful thing to have a team around them so that not only do they have a therapist, looking at the themes and patterns of the past, not only do they have possibly a sponsor if they're in a 12-step program helping them work the steps, but to have a coach helping them look at the future and mapping out what in their heart of hearts they might really like to create in their renewal, if we can call it that. And then, of course, if they have a relationship with a power greater than themselves, God, higher power, universal power, whatever somebody chooses to call it, that always seems to me to be the most powerful combination. That if you can have as many people on your team as possible, and I really feel that what you bring to the table as a coach is so incredibly valuable. And I know my clients do better, and even after they're finished working with you, Daisy, they'll keep referring back to things that they learned with you. And
that's so nice to hear that. I love that. Thank you.
No, absolutely. It's really quite heartwarming, but I think it speaks to us working together.
Yeah.
And I love the collaborative effort. So just wanted to mention that piece as well.
Great.
Yeah.
You gave me goosebumps. Thank you.
Oh, we have mutual goosebumps. We do that to each other.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So this is kind of a broad question, but just to shift gears a little bit, when you're helping somebody look for a job or make a career transition, what are some tips or suggestions you would have for people in that position?
Yeah, well, I think it is a big answer, but I'll try and keep it short. One is to accept where you are first. Really to spend some time looking at who you are and what's important to you now. And, so really looking at what's worked for you and what hasn't worked for you. And, starting to, in my mind's eye, I'm imagining, making a list of, this is, or maybe it's a narrative, this really didn't work for me. This has worked for me, and really circling those words that really appear to you, so that you can start to get a new idea of who you are. And then, as opposed to sitting down, a lot of people will just sit down and they'll go on a job search or a job listing like Indeed or LinkedIn, and they'll start looking at jobs, which can just totally drain you of every bit of energy and you don't want to do that. So, it's more about doing some brainstorming about what could be good for you, know what you need. It's interesting. A lot of times people don't know how much money they really need. And so really understanding that for yourself, do you need a full-time job? Can you do a part-time job? And even if people go online and get creative and just, into Google, you put together, a bunch of the words that are showing up for you, plug them into Google and see what kind of job shows up. I mean, it can even be as loose as that, but kind of creating an ideal job description for yourself can be a great way to start so that you can feel a little more inspired about the process. But I would say also that sometimes, like if you are just getting your footing again, maybe you've come out of a time of chaos and it's time to just get some income, and it doesn't have to be the be and be all job. Like that's where, how much money do I need to bring in? What's a good starting point? What's going to give me the flexibility, let's say, maybe to go to meetings or, so again, it's knowing those criteria. And then, if it does need to be a part-time job, and maybe it could be a shift kind of job. I mean, here we are in this really wacky new world, which is just so much upheaval for everybody. So, but there are lots of remote jobs now that are part-time, full-time. There's so many. It's such a fascinating time right now. And again, there's still a lot of creative ways to find employment. There are jobs out there that can work for everybody. So those are just a couple of ideas for people to get started with.
Yeah, I love what you said about starting with asking oneself, what do I really want? The soul searching piece sounds so significant because I think you're right. Sometimes people just bypass that whole process and start throwing darts at a dartboard with the hope that something will fit. And I hear the part of your process and part of how you work with people is really helping them slow down and check in with what is it that they really want, not just financially, which of course is important, but deep down, what would be a good fit? What would be fun? What would be interesting? And what would pay the bills for now?
Right. Yep.
Excellent. Yep. Fantastic. Yeah.
Oh, well, I was going to say, I think when I used to hear people, every now and then somebody will say this, they'll say, well, I'm trying to treat job searching like a job. And that to me sounds like death. It's this kind of idea that you should be putting your 8 hours in on your job search Monday through Friday, and that just to me sounds so soul sucking. And I just wouldn't wish that on anybody. In fact, I think job searching can be one of the most depleting things that people can do because it's such a vulnerable place to be in. I mean, I've written about this. I write a lot of blogs, and I think that the process of writing a resume, period, raises for everybody, raises so many very base vulnerabilities for us because we're immediately thinking, how do I stack up against somebody else?
Sure.
That compare and despair thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to write this resume and, all these other people are going to be better than me. It's like where we immediately go. So the whole job search process needs, we need to give so much compassion to ourselves and and really treat ourselves super kindly. And if that means you go out for a walk, or you take a good break and do something else that's creative or restorative in the process, and that's super important to the whole process.
Well, that's the perfect segue to my next question, actually, because separate from your work as a career and executive coach, you're also a longtime meditation practitioner and meditation instructor, as
Mm-hmm.
well as a somatic coach. I know you've done advanced training in somatic coaching. So,
Mm-hmm.
so how does all of that fit in with the work you do as a career coach?
Well, I think, baseline for me, that's just where I come from, right? Is a sense of, being present with yourself. And so that's the language and the mindset that I'm working with when I'm talking to clients. That I want them to be able to become more present for self.
Mm.
Um, and maybe I'm sort of adding the spinach to the birthday cake or something, but I'm not telling anybody I'm doing this,
Uh-huh.
but but just helping my clients to realize that their body has a lot of wisdom
Yeah.
that will inform them,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that if they can listen to themselves and access the quieter parts of themselves, they'll be able to hear more.
Mm.
Um, so it's not like I'm actually a meditation instructor or somatic coach with my clients, but
Right.
we are, sometimes I'll give people exercises to do that will
Mm.
help them to listen.
Mm-hmm.
So, because I just can't help that. That's just the air I breathe and, the way I look at the world.
Right, which the average coach doesn't have the depth of wisdom and experience that you do. And you really infuse a lot of ingredients, spinach sometimes, that people don't always get elsewhere. So I just want to kind of give the plug that you really have a very dimensional and holistic approach, and absolutely brings more tools, more strategies than some other folks out there. So for that,
Well,
I'm grateful.
thank you. I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, I always think, well, if I could go to a coach, if I could go to a career coach, who would I want to go to? And I think, well, I would want to find me. Because
Love that.
because um I guess I'm a very spiritual person, and
Uh-huh.
I've always asked myself, what does that mean? I don't really know
Yeah. Yeah.
what being spiritual means sometimes. But when you mention, that higher power
Yeah.
part of recovery, which is so important, I think that's one of the, for all of the challenges, and I've been through lots of challenges, and maybe that's, what, um, I have to be very grateful for all of those challenges because they help me to do what I do. Um, but I do think that having that sense of connection,
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
there is something bigger than us,
Right.
it's so, to me, that's what I find helps me to trust that I, as well as my clients, we get where we're going. We get to the right place.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it doesn't feel like the right place, it's taking us down the steps that we need.
Right. And what I would add to that is I really hear that you're saying that part of the spiritual journey in coaching and maybe in your approach is that there's more questions than there are answers. There's more
hmm
questions, and part of the process is to ask the big ticket items, ask as many questions as possible, really dig into all of the possibilities and what that means in terms of how to move forward with a meaningful fulfilling career or job, whatever it might be.
Mm-hmm. For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many wonderful things to do in life, for our vocation, for our passions. There's so many things to do that we're not aware of. It's
Mm-hmm.
not just, teacher, banker,
Right.
computers. I mean, there's so many nuanced ways that we can use our gifts. And, I just, I just always want to encourage people to know that, it may not be a straight line like we
Right.
kind of expect it to be. And things can get super messy sometimes, like beyond, here we are, it couldn't be messier practically,
Sure.
where we are right now. But, sometimes things are super chaotic and still out of that, can come so many fascinating discoveries and worthwhile and meaningful discoveries.
Sure. So this brings us to my final question for you. Do you have any particular inspiring or encouraging words for our listeners before we end our call? And lastly, please let us know how our listeners can reach you and contact you.
Hmm. Well, yeah, I'm certainly reachable, at my website is, daisyswan.com. And I have two nouns for a name, so that's pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but, and I'm on Instagram a fair amount, at Daisy Swan Coach. But, I, I guess, I do always want people to know that their gifts are unique to them, and that there's something, amazing that we each have, to put to work. And, I mean, it's the old stuff of love and work, right? Those are
Sure.
the two most important things, for us, right? And, um, I mean, it seems like there's so much more, but when it really comes down to it, I think being able to contribute in our own unique way is just so meaningful and,
Mm-hmm.
so, authentic to who we are when we find that right recipe for us, to put ourselves into action. I think of work. I know somebody else said this, but that authentic work is like love in action. And I do really feel that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way my work feels for me. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's the way you feel as well. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and, even like my son he's a software engineer. I think it's that for him too, you know, when you're so engaged in something and it's not always like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not always like that. And people do get lost in this idea of, oh, I'm not passionate. People use that word passion
Mm-hmm.
so much, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a misnomer sometimes because we're not always passionate. Um, and sometimes, you still fall in love with your work, even if you're not passionate about it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just say, just, know that if you haven't found it yet, you can. Absolutely, you can. And it really is about listening and looking and being curious. I think curiosity is
Mm-hmm.
the antidote to, anxiety. It's the antidote to fear of so many things, just continuing to be willing to look because
Sure.
it's our thing is out there. We're in here either way.
Right. Right. That's for sure. Well, as always, it has been a treat to spend some time with you today, Daisy. And Our listeners know how to reach you now, and your Instagram page is beautiful. And I think your website is very informative and talks about your online opportunities and classes and workshops and whatnot. And so I really encourage everybody to take a look. And we will cross paths again soon, I'm sure.
I hope so. I look forward to it, Andrew. You're such a gem.
Thank you, Daisy. You are as well. And be well, be safe, and we'll be in touch soon. Thank you for listening today. It was so terrific sharing the time with my very talented colleague and friend, Daisy Swan, and discussing this really significant and often underutilized topic of career coaching that can really be helpful to anybody in recovery from out-of-control sexual behavior. Please be sure to give us a 5-star rating on iTunes, or please share our podcast on Spotify. And if there are any other topics you'd like us to discuss in the future, just let us know. I look forward to you joining us on future podcasts, and thanks again for being with us today.